Everybody, this is Dream, and today we're going to do a nice little 6-game slate for FanDuel baseball. Now, I haven't done a FanDuel baseball video yet. This is going to be the first one, and it's a pretty good slate for it. There's 6 games. We got some decent pitchers. We got a couple teams that are stackable. Then we got a couple other teams that are kind of something that we can look at for value. And then I'll get into the players after that. So my 2 stackable teams are Houston and the LA Dodgers. For good reason. They're the 2 best teams playing in this particular slate, and they have some upside in their matchups against the pitchers they're going against. I'm going to mention Detroit Tigers left-handed hitters and the LA Angels right-handed hitters, mostly just Trout. And if Ohtani plays, then he's potentially a good option for against Detroit, and Tyler Alexander, who's not very good. They have the best situational thing. Also, Chicago White Sox have some plus bats going on too. So with that said, let me go ahead and get into the players that I like. So the top option is Tristan McKenzie. He has the best strikeout upside and the best runs against today. And I think that, especially on FanDuel, strikeouts are very important. As you can see, he has a lot of good games with strikeouts. Now, he does have a tendency to have 3 or 4, but I think he's still going to be solid against Kansas City, who likes to strike out. And then the other guy that I like pretty good is Lance Lynn. Now, he doesn't have the ERA that we like, but he can be offset. If he gives up a couple earned runs, he can offset those with his strikeouts. And you can see that his strikeouts are pretty consistent. He doesn't have the best matchup compared to McKenzie, but he's a good cheaper option if you want to try to save some money at pitching. However, on FanDuel, it's pretty important to get one of the top guys as your pitcher. So don't try to go for some Tyler Alexander against LA Angels or something at $6,100 because he's not going to get the strikeouts and he's probably going to give up some runs and stuff like that. So you want to prioritize guys that get strikeouts, and these 2 are the best ones that I could come up with for this slate. There's no super awesome pitcher on this slate, unfortunately, but we have a couple good ones available. So let's go ahead and get into the batters. Now I'm gonna go in the order of what I've changed. The thing here is the stats for the last 10 games. Now I didn't use that to make this, but that does come into play here. It's gonna make it easier for me to find the players I'm gonna tell you about because most of them are gonna be in the upper section of this. So anyway, let's go ahead and get into this. All right, so the first guy I'm going to talk about is Freddie Freeman. He's going to be a really good option today. He's got a nice little upside. Now, let me talk to you a little bit about how salary works on FanDuel, which is a little bit different. I mean, it's similar to DraftKings, but on FanDuel, you get one pitcher, and then you get a catcher and a first baseman, then a second base, a third base, a shortstop, and then 3 outfielders, and then a utility option, which can be literally somebody from any position. So you could technically get 2 first basemen if you want, and a lot of times first basemen are really good to throw in here. And so, I'll show you kind of how that looks like. Let's just say that we put Freddie Freeman in here as a first baseman. So that's going to knock us down to $29.14 per player. So obviously we're going to have to get some sub 3,000 guys in our lineup. Thankfully today there's some pretty good options available. So anyway, with Freddie Freeman, I think that he's a home run threat, and he's going up against a subpar pitcher in Logan Webb. Now obviously he has some potential because he bats to the left in this matchup, and so that's why I like him. Then the next guy I have is Jose Abreu for Chicago White Sox. He's been hitting the ball pretty well lately, and he's got a lot of potential in this particular matchup as well against Seattle, where Marco Gonzalez has not really been doing very good. He's kind of hit or miss, though. He needs to really hit a home run to really pay off, but he has the potential to do that. The next guy I like is Will Smith. Let's see if I can find him here. Here he is. Will Smith has been hitting the ball really well as of late. You can see he's had some really big games, but he's kind of boom or bust. You can see that he's got some really bad games as well, so you do have to be careful, but he is also inexpensive at $3,000. The next guy I like is Christian Walker at first baseman. He's a home run threat in this game against Blake Snell. And he's been hitting the ball really well as of late. And we can look at his game log and see that he's had quite a few really good games. And he really only had 2 terrible games. And for his price point, it's not too risky. The next guy that I like is going to be Nathaniel Lowe, who has just been absolutely tearing the ball up lately. Almost all these games, he's got over 10 fantasy points and some over 20, and even a big old 50 for a big home run day. Obviously, on FanDuel, getting RBIs and runs scored are really beneficial to scoring lots of points. And so, as you can tell, he's somebody that's been hitting the ball extremely well as of late. He's actually number 1 in fantasy points per game, I think, for the last 10 games. So then, if we look further, we can find Trey Mancini. He has been hitting the ball pretty well as of late. He's kind of a home run hit and in a plus matchup here. Obviously, he's a little bit of a boomer bust option, but he's pretty decent, and he's $2,700. He's definitely somebody that you could think about for the utility position. And then 2 other guys at catcher/first base that are good for utility position potentially are Josh Bell, who has been kind of hit or miss, but he has some home run potential in this particular matchup. And then also MJ Melendez. Now, if you go with Tristan McKenzie, then I would not advise using Melendez. But he does have some home run potential, and he has been hitting the ball pretty well. He's pretty much one of the only guys on Kansas City that I think really pose a threat to McKenzie, other than Bobby Witt, who's been hitting the ball well as well. But he's just cheap enough where you could almost, you could take a chance with him if you really needed to. So with that said, really, it's this first baseman that I like at the catcher/first base, with the exception of really Will Smith. And obviously he's pretty inexpensive, but he's not. His potential is home run or bust, but he's not been consistent enough just getting hits and stuff to make it really worthwhile, I don't think. But we have plenty of good options at that position. So at second position, I've only got 4 guys for you, but of course they're going to be good options. Jose Altuve obviously is the top dog. He's been hitting the ball extremely well as of late. He's got 2 bad games in the last 10 or so, and he's just been absolutely mashing it and getting lots of points scored. Marcus Semien is the next guy that I like for Texas at Houston. Going against Hunter Brown. I mean, he's a rookie, and he hadn't played much, and Semien has been really hitting the ball extremely well as of late, and so I think he's a really solid option. And then I have 2 other cheap options for you here that you could potentially use. One of them is Ketel Marte. Now, he hasn't been hitting the ball quite as good as we'd like, but he does have some potential in this matchup against Blake Snell because of the way he bats, and so that really helps him. And then the final guy is Javier Baez for Detroit, and he's part of a potential Detroit stack against the Angels. Obviously, he's not the most ideal. It's not ideal to like stack Detroit, but it would be a great option especially if you're trying to get an alternate like GPP lineup where you stack the Detroit Tigers, and then you could potentially pull off a really big upset if they can have a really good game. So I think he's a pretty decent option. He's been hitting the ball pretty well as of late, which is pretty good. It's not, he's going to have more hit or miss games, but he's still a pretty decent option for today that's pretty inexpensive. So let's go ahead and get into third baseman. I think second baseman and shortstop's probably the weakest positions, but third baseman actually looks really good. And I would actually probably recommend knocking 2 of these guys into the lineup if you can find a way to. I think just overall it has the best options available. So to start off, we've got Jose Ramirez for Cleveland. Obviously, he's pretty expensive at $3,900, but he's been hitting the ball pretty well. Not as well as we'd like, really, for his price, but he's still a home run threat every time he comes out, and he's gone up against a weak pitcher for his position. And then the next guy that I like is Alex Bregman, who for a little while really was bashing the ball. He's still hitting it pretty good, but he's had more ups and downs lately, but he's still kind of a boomer bust position, and he can hit the ball extremely well when he gets a good matchup, and this is definitely a good matchup for him. Then the next guy that I like is Manny Machado. Obviously, he's super expensive, and I don't know that he's going to be the best option, even though he's been really lighting the ball up lately. Just because his price is probably not somebody you're going to want to try to sneak in there, especially against a rookie pitcher that we don't really know how he's going to do against. The next guy that I like is Bobby Witt Jr. Now, obviously, he's going against the pitcher that I like the most, so that's a little bit risky. But he's also been hitting the ball pretty well as of late, so he's somebody to consider. And then I've got three value guys that I think are really solid. The first one is going to be Will Castro for Detroit. Now, he's been hitting the ball pretty well of late. He's had some big games. He's not perfect by any stretch of an agent, and he's had some bad games as well. But he's kind of somebody that you could kind of sneak in if you really needed to pay for somebody. He's kind of a boomer bust mentality, but he can hit, pretty good occasionally. The next guy that I think is probably my favorite is going to be Justin Turner. Now, he hadn't really hit a ton of home runs this year, but as you can see, he's been hitting the ball pretty well lately. And so he's been scoring in a 15, 20-point game quite a few times. And so I think I like his upside, and his price point is really good at $3,000. And then finally, last but not least, is Candelario for Detroit. Now, he hadn't hit the ball well all season, but he's actually been hitting pretty decently as of late. He went through a pretty big slump for, prior to this little boost that he went on. And then he hadn't hit the ball particularly well the last couple games, but he's been against some pretty good pitchers. So look for him as a potential option if he does start to potentially be part of a Detroit stack. Obviously, he's kind of a weaker option. I definitely like Justin Turner the best out of those, pretty much the best out of third base. But overall, there's some good options at that position. For a shortstop, I have four guys for you. The top guy is Corey Seager. Obviously, he's the most expensive option here, but he's a home run threat. He's been kind of hit or miss lately, but he has like 40-point upside when he does really well, and he's got a pretty good pitcher to go against, and Hunter Brown, who's a rookie. The next guy, like I already talked about, which is Bobby Witt Jr., and I have two cheap guys. One of them is Javier Baez, who I already talked about, and then the other is going to be Andrew Velazquez for the LA Angels. So he's kind of an interesting spot against Tyler Alexander because he's a switch hitter. So he's an extremely boomer bust, but he's had some good games lately. And so obviously he's not a great hitter, and sometimes he bats it back at the back of the lineup a lot. And as you can see in some of these games, he pinch hit, so he had one or two at bats in those games. But overall, or because the Angels just don't score many runs lately, he doesn't get a ton of options. But if you really need to save money, he's almost minimum priced, and so he doesn't have to score you a ton of points to pay off, obviously. But he's still pretty risky, but he's kind of a boomer bust option. So at shortstop, I definitely recommend either Baez or paying up for one of the more expensive guys, and then saving money at third base and the utility option. In outfield, we have a lot of good options available. So obviously Trout and Ohtani are going to be guys that you could potentially use in their lineups. Now Ohtani doesn't have the advantage of the pitching aspect, so you do have to keep that into consideration. But he does have home run upside regardless of that. Trout is obviously the best option of the day because he has the good pitching differential against Tyler Alexander for Detroit. I definitely expect him to have a pretty potentially high scoring game just because of his production as of late. Then obviously Mookie Betts is always a good option, and he's got high upside in this particular matchup. Logan Webb has not been very good lately, and so I definitely like Mookie Betts in this matchup. He's also just a home run threat overall. Obviously, he's not batting the right way for what we'd really like, but he's super expensive anyway, so I just mentioning him because he's definitely a possibility for a home run. Riley Green is probably one of my favorite options in the outfield, and he's $3,400. He's going up against Jose Suarez, and Detroit has some upside here in this matchup. Even though he bats, and because he bats to the left as well, Suarez has been really bad against lefties. And he has had some pretty good games lately. Obviously, he does have some home run upside. He doesn't hit a ton of home runs, but I think he's only played like 80 games so far. So he definitely has some upside in this matchup. The next guy I like is Adolis Garcia. Now he's a little bit overpriced for what I would like to pay for him, but if you have the money, if you need a $4,000 guy and this is the last position, then he could definitely be your guy. Um, the next guy I really like is Jock Peterson for San Francisco. He's been hitting the ball really well lately, as you can see. He's had a couple off games, but overall he's hitting the ball pretty good. He's got a nice little plus matchup for San Francisco, and it doesn't matter which way you're hitting in that matchup. And so I definitely think he's a top option at this position. AJ Pollock, and also Eloy Jimenez, and Andrew Vaughn are all options for Chicago White Sox. They all have. Let's see if I can just do it like this. There we go. All three of them have been hitting the ball pretty well lately. I like what Pollock has been doing on FanDuel. Not so much a good player on DK because he's kind of a boomer bust kind of guy, but he does get RBIs a lot, and that really pays off on FanDuel. Eloy Jimenez is kind of in the same situation. He's very boomer bust, but if he booms, and he can boom for 30. And then obviously Andrew Vaughn, he's been pretty good as of late. He doesn't really have the upside that like Eloy or AJ has, but he still has tendency to get 20+ point games, and so I think they're all viable options. Then I've got four more guys, all four of them are kind of cheaper options. One of them is Mitch Haniger for Seattle. Now he's going against Lance Lynn, who's one of the pitchers I do like, so that's a little bit of a beware. And he hadn't been hitting the ball quite as good as we like, but he's still pretty decent. And he really has some home run upside occasionally. And probably not in this particular position, but he's still somebody that checks out from a data perspective. And then the last three guys, one of them is Profar. I need to change this back. Is Profar for San Diego. Now, he hadn't hit the ball very well. He's been really boomer bust as of late. As you can see, it's like almost every other game where he's actually doing pretty good. And so just take that into consideration if you decide to use him. He does have a plus matchup, though. And then Steven Kwan, he's not really a home run hitter, and obviously we like home run hitters more than anything. But he still has tendency to get steals, which is going to give us some points. He's probably not going to score 30 points, but he could get you 10 to 15 if he plays his cards right against the bad pitcher he's going against. And last but not least is my last guy for Detroit, who you could run a GPP lineup with, is Kerry Carpenter. If he plays, he's very boomer bust, but when he does boom, he really booms well. And like Detroit does have trouble scoring sometimes, but if these guys actually get going against the Angels, he's going to be somebody that you're going to want to have in your lineup, assuming that he starts. So that's pretty much what I have for this matchup of games. I think it's a pretty good slate. It's not the most ideal slate, obviously, but it's a good slate to start off making videos for. And so I definitely recommend Tristan McKenzie or Lance Lynn as your starting pitcher, and then you can find some good value in the other positions. And if you have any comments or questions, or if there's any players that you think I've left out, or any players you disagree with, feel free to leave those things below. And thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing, and have a nice day, guys.